I'd like to preface this by saying that I live a pretty quote-unquote straight-edge lifestyle, so I'm certain that what I saw and heard last New Year's Eve wasn't the result of some hallucination or drunken stupor, but was 100% real. I live on the outskirts of your stereotypical small southern town, so a few of my friends live out further into the boondocks that are only accessible by those dark country back roads. One of my friends, Darren, lives with his family in one of the richer neighborhoods in the area that can only be reached by these back roads every year. His family throws a party at their house on New Year's Eve where all the family's friends are invited. Myself included, it's a pretty fun occasion. So I'm always excited when I get the formal invitation from Darren's parents in the mail, seeing as the weather in the South can be pretty weird. When it comes to winter, it didn't get really cold until a few days before New Year's Eve. I could remember the newly frigid air paired with a bumpy, unkempt country roads made for an uncomfortable ride to the house. Usually I don't drive with my brights on, since I hate how other drivers always blind me with theirs, but the sheer darkness of the windy, narrow road needed a necessity this time. Anyways, the narrow road was surrounded on both sides by dense tree line, so even with my brights, it was hard to see where exactly all the twists and turns were ahead. Notably, there aren't any other houses between the turnoff to the road and Darren's neighborhood, except for a lone shack that seemed like it had been abandoned for years, though I could sometimes see lights on inside whenever I passed this way. A few minutes into the drive on a particularly straight section of the road, my lights illuminated something ahead amongst the trees, something white against the darkness as I neared. I could see it was the shape of a person standing all alone on the side of the road. They weren't moving or hiding, just standing completely still with their back to the trees. It was a woman evidently wearing a white dress or gown of some sort, not at all appropriate for the cold. I didn't turn my brights off out of caution, so I couldn't really make out any specific details in the reflective glare of the white dress as I passed her. I was thanking my lucky stars that she didn't step out in the middle of the road, causing me to stop. But then I started to wonder if maybe I should have stopped to see if she needed some help. Perhaps she was another guest trying to get to Darren's party. But it wasn't until I looked back in my mirror to see in the red glare of my rear lights that the woman had turned her body to follow me, still frozen. In that one spot, it was definitely creepy, and in that moment, I was glad I'm not the greatest example of a good Samaritan. No way was that a fellow party guest. I arrived at the party without any further incident around 8 p.m., parking in the gravel circle, amongst the dozen or so other cars outside Darren's house, which situated in a large clearing in the surrounding forest, just like all the other spaced houses in the neighborhood. The festivities went on until we had watched both the ball drop in New York as well as our own time zone's clock striking 12th, after which everyone slowly started to clear out. I stayed behind a bit to help clean up as I usually did, since I was one of the closer friends of Darren's family, and by the time I myself left my car, was the only one left at the front of the house. When I got in and started it up, I got a low tire pressure light. My car is an older model, so it didn't give me exact details as to which tire was low or how many had the issue before I freaked out. I remembered that this sort of thing always happens with my tires when the weather first turned cold after a long, warm period. I figured I'd be able to make it home okay. But before I drove off, I remembered that woman I had seen on my way. She still out there somewhere. Had anyone else come across her? There was another way in the opposite direction I could use to get home to avoid that road, but it would add another 20 minutes or so to my commute, which I didn't want to do so late at night, and with possible drunk drivers out and about, I figured I'd just suck it up and just go back the way I came. I really wish I didn't. Not even a few minutes out on that same dark back road, I could feel something was different with my tire. I could hear it too. It sounded like bare metal scraping against the road. Slowly, my car came to a dead stop. I muttered this was a different situation entirely. All that was going through my head was, did my tires fall off? Against my better judgment, I had to get out of the car to see what was wrong. Stupidly, I turned the engine off and shut the door. The car's lights turned off automatically, and I was plunged into the deep darkness of the surrounding forest with my phone flashlight. I scanned each of my tires. My heart sank as each and every one of them had been ripped to shreds as if they were torn apart by the claws of some animal. I could have reasoned that if one had a large puncture in it, the bumpy road could have caused even more damage. But all four tires, this was deliberate. But no, I thought, could it have been? I stood around hopelessly. No one would be out at such an hour on this road, even on New Year's Eve. I'd have to call a towing service or for someone to come and get me. But of course, there was no phone service this deep into the boys. But just as I was about to get back into the car, the gentle wind died down, the barren tree branches stopped swaying, and even the wildlife that was still out this time of year went quiet. I froze. I had never heard such silence before. It was as if time had stopped for a minute before I heard the sickening sound of a twig snap somewhere within the trees. Something was moving around. I instantly shut the light from my phone off, leaving complete darkness, leaves on the ground. Ground continued to rustle as if someone was stalking through the forest. Was it a squirrel, a deer? No, this was the type of silence of prey when a predator was nearby. And then I heard, "I see you." My stomach dropped. All the air was sucked out of my body. I couldn't even scream. It was a woman's voice, soft and quiet, coming from the pitch-black darkness of the tree line. Not 15 feet away, it was said without malice, which somehow made it even freakier in that moment. All I wanted to do was just shell up onto the ground and die. Then I heard, "Can you see me?" It wasn't until I heard the voice again that my fight ORF flight response kicked in. But I was disoriented, standing there in the darkness. I had to turn my phone light back on if I wanted to see which direction I wanted to flee. I aimed the flashlight directly in front of me, and standing at the edge of the tree line was the woman in the white gown this time, her features visible. The gown was dirt or covered in dark stains. She was deathly pale, skinny as a rail, and her disheveled gray hair fell down to her elbows. But her face was almost indescribable, grotesque, as if she were missing half of her jaw. Yet it seemed as though she were trying to grin at me in my indecisive horror. I had the flashlight trained on her for a few moments before I hauled ass down the road back towards Darren's house. The shack I had mentioned earlier was closer to my current position, down the opposite direction. But what if this woman was the one who actually lived there? I don't know if that was a rational thought made in the spur of the moment, but I had no time to wonder. As I sprinted down the road, I could hear the snapping of twigs and rustling of leaves behind me. She was chasing me, but I was quickly able to lose her with such a massive rush of adrenaline. I made it back to Darren's house, ignoring the rest of the neighborhood, and I pounded on the door, pleading for the door to open up. His mother answered the door and quickly ushered me inside. Seeing how shaken up I was, where I explained everything. Everything to her, along with Darren and his father. They were sympathetic, offering to let me stay the night there, while they called the police in a towing service, which I gladly accepted before even contacting my own family. The police said they would search the area around the road that night, and that I could come get my car back and make a statement the next day. But all I wanted to do for now was put that night behind me and fade to sleep in the guest bedroom. But I soon found out that night wasn't over. I awoke from my sleep to the sound of a light tap from the second-story window. I looked at the digital clock on the nightstand. I remember the time exactly, 3:14 a.m. Of course, none of the windows in the room had blinds. I didn't dare look out until I heard the muffled voice from outside. The same voice saying, "I see you." The woman was still out there. She had chased me all the way here, and now she was throwing rocks to get my attention. If I wasn't going to look out the window before, I definitely wasn't going to. Now I wasn't going to leave my spot in that bed or fall asleep until morning. When the sun rose and Darren's family woke up, the woman was gone. Thankfully, I told them what else happened, and we all looked outside together before the police showed up in the yard, about where I had heard the voice coming from. Darren's father found a large rusty knife that didn't belong to the family, presumably what the woman had used when slashing my tires, but that also meant she had followed my car there to the party at the beginning of the night, specifically targeted me when everyone else was inside during the festivities, Darren's parents called, and asked the other party guests if they had seen anything suspicious the night before. And one of their friends said they had seen someone in a white dress walking around outside from the window, but thought nothing of it, seeing as how people were coming and going all night. When I gave the police my statement, I told them to check around that shack on the road here, as I had a hunch that woman had something to do with it. They eventually did and updated me that they found no one living there. But there was dead, gutted wildlife sprawled all around the surrounding woods. That woman I saw was never found. which of course raises a bunch of questions. The scariest ones to me, though, are how she was able to track me down so quickly once I left the party. And if she was missing so much of her face, how was she able to pronounce those words so clearly? Despite what happens, I'll still be going to Darren's house for New Year's Eve again this year. But this time I'll make sure to carpool and take the long way around. When I was 26, I took a trip to San Diego via plane. I stayed with my friend for a few days and booked a late flight back home. My flight landed at midnight by the time I was off the plane, and by the ground transportation pickup point, it was like 12:30. I waved down a random taxi in the taxi section and gave the driver my home address. He said he'd take me for $30, which was a really good deal compared to Uber. He came out to help me put my bag in the trunk of the van, but I said I was fine with it in the seat next to me. So he lifted my bag onto the seat on the left side behind him. I was sitting diagonal from him. He got back in the car and pulled up the directions to my apartment, and we were on our way. My, at the time, apartment was about a half-hour drive from the airport with no traffic at this hour. There was obviously no traffic. We got right on the highway, and we were moving fast. I caught the driver's eyes. Saint staring at me through the mirror on 2 separate occasions. And on the second time he spoke, he asked where I was coming from. I said, San Diego. He said, oh, very nice. Then he asked me what I was doing there. I said I was just visiting a friend who lives there. His response was, is your friend as pretty as you? And honestly, my first reaction was to laugh. But I found the comment really creepy, and it being the third thing out of his mouth on the ride didn't help from here. His questions kind of stayed on the flirty side. He asked me, what is a pretty girl like you doing traveling all by yourself? And I had a slightly sassy response saying, well, I just said I wasn't alone. I was visiting my friend. And his rebuttal was that by flying by myself, I was traveling by myself. I maintained my slight sass and said we can agree to disagree. And he laughed and said he was only teasing me. This man had to be like 45. Though I felt like him hitting on a lone girl in her 20s, like this was slightly creepy. It wasn't in the first time I dealt with something like this, though. As we continued down the highway, I looked up as I saw the familiar overpass right by my exit. But as we passed it, he wasn't slowing down. I said, this is my exit, as he was literally about to pass it, and we zoomed right by it. I repeated myself louder, saying that that was my exit. He apologized and said he'd catch the next one. I tried to get a peek at his screen to see if he put the right address in, but it was angled so that I couldn't see it. The next exit was about a mile further. I started sitting up on the edge of my seat a bit now. When the next exit approached, I said loud and clear, you need to get off here. And without acknowledging me, he turned on his blinker and merged off the exit. I noticed him glaring at me for a second to the mirror. I almost sensed a hint of annoyance in his face, but I guess that quickly changed when not even a minute later, he asked me if I had a boyfriend. I replied back instantly, yes, he lives with me. I noticed him look at me again, and I think he picked up on how quickly I answered that he asked what my boyfriend's name is. Yes. I'm serious. I decided that was enough. I told him I'm going to put my headphones in. So I popped my AirPods into my ears, even though they were basically dead still. I just wanted this man to stop asking me questions. Asking my boyfriend's name was next level weird, almost like he was interrogating me. I texted my family and close friends about this creepy taxi driver, and I shared my location in case, God forbid, things went sour. We were in a familiar area in my town. Now we were stopped at the first red light since getting off the highway. I looked in the mirror, and all I saw were his eyes glaring at me, almost in this menacing way. I know he didn't say anything to me, because I didn't even have any music or anything playing, so I would have heard him. The light was now green and he was still staring at me. I had to tell him the light was green and he started moving again. No one in my family was answering, except for my old brother, who must have been the only one awake, but he lives 2 hours away from me. My brother told me I should leave the car if I feel threatened or in.